We are going to be going through the book of Ruth this month. So if you have a Bible, access to a Bible with you, today we're just going to go through chapter 1. It's going to be kind of a warm-up and an introduction to Ruth. And I really enjoy being in classes that have discussion, so I also enjoy leading classes that require discussion. So if you have a thought or a question, please raise your hand and throw it out there whenever. So I like to read out of, I think this is the ESV. But I'm going to go ahead and read. Actually, who else would like to read? Would you like to read, Carmen?
Yeah, sure.
Cool. If you could read just chapter 1, verses 1 through 5.
Yeah. Hold on just 1 second.
Mm-hmm.
Ruth chapter 1,
Mm-hmm.
1 to 5.
1 through 5.
Now it came about in the days when the judges governed that there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the land of Moab with his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the name of their 2 sons were Mahlon, Chilion, and of Bethlehem and Judah. Now they entered the land of Moab and remained there. When Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, she was left with her 2 sons. They took themselves Moabite women as wives. The name of one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth, and they lived there about 10 years. Then both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and the women were bereaved of their 2 children and her husband.
Okay, so these 5 verses just covered a ton of time and a lot of crisis and a lot of grief. So in the very first verse, it says, in the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. And so there's a famine in the land and there's judges ruling. So what was significant during the time of judges? Who was not ruling? There was no king. So there's just judges ruling. If you remember the book of Judges, it's a little chaotic and horrific and really violent. So they've got this going on. There's no king. There's just judges ruling. There's also a famine. So with these 2 things in mind, I've never really noticed either of these 2 things. Because normally I'm like, oh, okay, there's famine, there's judges, blah, blah, blah. Let's get to the Ruth and Boaz part. But think about, how would this affect their situation? There's a famine. How would both of these factors affect their living situations? Particularly the famine. Poor. They're hungry.
Make it pretty desperate.
Yeah. And so it says that a man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the country of Moab. So is Moab like home for someone from Bethlehem? No. That's a foreign land for them. He and his wife and his 2 sons. Why might they, and this is kind of speculation, but you can probably guess given a famine, why might they have left Bethlehem and went to Moab?
Because there was food there.
Yeah, because there's food there. I've seen in some commentaries where they're really criticized for this decision to leave Bethlehem and go to a foreign country for food, because you see later that there's blessing in God's country for that food. So Elimelech and his wife Naomi and their 2 kids named Mahlon or Malone and Chilion, they left and went to Moab. They were Ephrathites, and so they are like super from Bethlehem. They weren't just living there. They're actually like children of God living in Bethlehem. And they went to Moab. So Moab is a whole pagan country. It's all foreign, but they're there, desperate times. Their physiology is affected by this famine. What they probably would have considered untouchable people they would never be around. Now they're having to say, okay, well, this is what it's come to. It's time to go to Moab. So from Naomi's perspective, she's taking her sons and her husband, and she's leaving everything she's known in pursuit of taking care of her family. Elimelech, it says, but Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died. Just, that's it. we have no idea how he died, but he died. And she was left with her 2 sons. So now her 2 sons are they taking Jewish wives, Hebrew wives? No, what kind of wives are they taking? Yeah. And is that something they're supposed to do technically? Is that something they kind of recommend? Or not so much? No. And so I really take this a lot from Naomi's perspective as their mother. How many concessions she's made. Okay, we left our homeland. Her husband died. And in her grief, she has her sons. And now they're taking wives. They're taking Moabite wives, but they're taking wives. So the Moabite wives' names were Orpah and Ruth. And then they lived together about 10 years. So I have no idea what your relationship's like with your mother-in-law. And I don't know if you lived as closely as these women probably lived, at least emotionally. But they had 10 years to get to know each other as her sons and her in-laws, they had 10 years together. And then her sons died. And so she has lost her husband and both of her sons within this relatively short span of time as far as loss goes. So then when you move into verse 6, who would like to read verse 6 through, trying to determine. How about verse 6 through 14? Okay, go ahead. Thank you.
Then she arose with her daughters-in-law that she might return from the country of Moab. For she had heard in the country of Moab that the Lord had visited his people by giving them bread. Therefore, she went out from the place where she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. And Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, Go, return each to her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you, as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant you that you may find rest, each in the house of her husband. So she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they said to her, Surely we will return with you to your people. But Naomi said, Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Are there still sons in my womb, that they may be your husbands? Turn back, my daughters, go, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, if I should have a husband tonight, and should also bear sons, would you wait for them till they were grown? Would you restrain yourselves from having husbands? No, my daughters, for it grieves me very much for your sakes that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me. Then they lifted up their voices and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her.
Thank you. So I listened to something called Holy Ghost Stories. Have y'all heard of this podcast? It is fantastic. And I'm super picky about all things audio. It is so good. And I listened to, I meant to post it in the group. Had a lot going on yesterday. And I meant to post it in the group. They have a 3-part podcast episode on the story of Ruth. And I listened to the first part. And the author of the podcast does such a good job displaying and describing this grief interaction between these 3 women who have just clung to each other in all of this grief, and being Naomi in this foreign land, and these women learning how they're being wives from Naomi, and just this intimate relationship they all have. Just the nonstop crying during this conversation. This isn't really like they're all dead now, so I think you should go home. It's like they're weeping over this because, of course, she doesn't want to lose these 2 daughters-in-law. They're her children, effectively, at this point. But she's thinking, especially during this time. So during this time, what was it like to be a widow? What do you know about being a widow during this time?
You were in total abject poverty.
Yeah. And judges are ruling and there's a famine. So in the best of times, it's not the best awesome to be a widow. But right now, you're in poverty, in a famine, with a governance that is chaos. And so she is saying, Naomi is thinking of the future of these 2 young women and saying, go Find a future that will sustain you, because I cannot do that for you. And it's almost laughable. She's saying, like, you going to wait around for kids from me? You think I can have more children for you? Even if I could, would you wait? No, And so she's telling them, she says, turn back, my daughters, go your way. Because doesn't it say, they were going back to Judah. So Naomi's like, I'm going to go home. I'm going back to everyone with my whole family's gone. I have no idea how this interaction is going to go when I come in empty-handed, totally reliant on my community. And instead of bringing these girls to a foreign land, I'm saying go back home where at least you know people. I'm willing to lose again, to grieve again, so that you can go be among family, something familiar. And so anyway, she's giving this really great argument as to why, like, we'll never see each other again, please go. And this is, they lifted up their voices and wept. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. And so I'm going to read the next part. And she said, this is Naomi, see, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. But Ruth said, do not urge me. And you can imagine her weeping this. Again, it's so easy to read Bible conversations as like, no, I don't think I will. Like, she's weeping. She said, see, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people. Ruth said, do not urge me to leave you or return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you. And when Naomi saw she was determined to go with her, she said no more. So, what can you imagine is going on in Naomi's heart right now?
Probably torn.
Yeah.
I'd say relief to some
Yeah.
degree.
I think so. We're in this together. Whatever this is, they're in it together.
It also makes me think of Ruth and thinking that it's better in her mind to go with her mother-in-law to uncertainty
Mm-hmm.
than it was to go home.
Yeah.
What was it like at home?
Yeah. And she also mentions, she says, your God will be my God. And I know that polytheism was the norm. Like, you would kind of pick a God per need. But Yahweh is the only God that claims to be exclusive. And so I'm reading some significance into that, but I think it warrants it because it's talking about Jehovah God. But Ruth is fully committing to Naomi. It's said in the Holy Ghost podcast that Naomi, and he uses artistic liberty in this, but he tries to be consistent with character. And he admits, like, this is my rendition of the story from what I see in narrative. He's very good about saying, like, this is from the author and this is from the Bible, and the goal is that they coincide. But he said that Naomi would say things like, anything good you see in me is you seeing God. And so that's not a quote from Naomi, but I feel that Ruth, even claiming to follow Naomi's God, must speak. Naomi's actions must have taught Ruth something about Jehovah. She's willing to follow her and leave home behind. So the two of them, yes.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
It's also possible that if Ruth had not stayed with her, that Naomi would not have been able to glean in the, I mean, she may not have been she would probably not survive.
No, not at all. I don't think she would have.
I don't think so either.
In a famine?
And I think
No.
Ruth knew that.
Yeah.
And, I mean, again, just supposing
Yeah.
what might have been going on. But I can very much see that because Naomi was not able to go out in the fields
No.
when Ruth did. And
No.
she would have if she had been able,
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure.
Absolutely. Why not? 2 times
Yeah.
the harvest, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I keep coming back to the fact it was a famine because I have been alive not super long, but long enough to where I should have read the famine part with more intentionality. There's a famine. Her health is probably shot at this point, you know, like because of years of malnourishment. It's probably a text about Paris. I've been getting a lot of pictures and videos, and I'm really happy. I've already found my mood lifted, and my attitude changed since 10 minutes ago. Right? It's the Holy Spirit working in me. So, yeah, I think the impact of the famine, like long-term malnourishment, has significant impact on the body. And so.
I think also the where you go, I will go, and Ruth saying that a lot of like the whole thing was her forsaking her nation and her culture.
Yeah.
And basically everything she grew up with, her family, that she had, she was forsaking it
Yeah.
all, to go with Naomi. And I think that holds a really, as poetic and beautiful as it is,
Mhm.
it has such a deep, meaning
Mhm.
of what's actually going on. It's not a flippant vow.
Oh, yeah.
But it's like she's completely leaving everything she knows and loves.
Oh, yes.
For Naomi and for, God.
And it's especially bold as women in this time because she can't I'll pick up a 9 to 5. We'll carry the insurance through my job. You can hang out at home, Naomi. These were two women going off, and Ruth, she probably had more perks going back home, and being taken care of. And so forsaking all of that, moving forward, was even more treacherous for her.
And that brings another point,
Mhm.
that the journey from Moab to Bethlehem is
Mhm.
very rocky, hilly,
Yeah,
and it was very treacherous.
absolutely.
And something to also bring up is she's Moab, she's a Moabite.
Mhm.
She is not from Bethlehem. So the fact that she is going to a place where she
Yeah.
will not be welcome,
No.
with open arms, is also, terrifying.
Yeah.
And to be able to just do that, because it's not like she was just, moving from Tennessee to Kentucky.
Mm-mm.
It was a big deal.
Absolutely.
Paris to Texas.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, and I also wonder her chances of getting remarried in Moab would have been far greater than finding a husband in.
Well, wasn't it, the Lord, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that the Lord did not, put it down, it's part of the law to not marry women outside of their people.
That was my understanding.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's my,
Yeah.
if I remember correctly. So, she wouldn't be married technically, is what she's going and thinking, I'm sure.
Yeah. There's no security in what she's choosing. Not at all. And so, let's see, where did I leave off in here? So the two of them, Ruth and Naomi, went on until they came to Bethlehem. It just says they went on. So that's quite a hitchhike, That took a while. Many a blister in a famine during the time of Judges. Things be wild. It's like the Wild West. And when they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. Stirred because of them. I love some of this language. So the whole town was stirred. What would cause them to stir?
Them talking.
So what's the stir about? Okay. They're excited. They said, "Is this Naomi?" I wonder what she was looking like. Also, she's missing 3 young men. Well, 2 young men and probably an old guy. They're gone. And then she's got this random Moabite girl with her. "Is this Naomi?" And she, being Naomi, said to them, "Do not call me Naomi." What does Naomi mean? It means pleasant. She said, "Call me Mara," because Mara means bitter. "For the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me." When you read that, what are you picturing? What are you thinking? In what ways do you know?
Sounds like bitter. Why would you pick that name knowing
Yeah.
what it means unless you had that anger inside of you?
Yeah.
Frustration, full of grief.
Yes. I feel like it's really grief driven. I don't think there's a sense of entitlement behind her saying that. I think
It's almost sounding like she's blaming God for her husband and her son's death.
I think she feels he's responsible. I don't see a lack of her following him, because you see a lot of people who, like David effectively yells at God in prayer, but he still follows God. And I think the Psalms are such a great way to see how God can handle all of your emotions. I had someone tell me once, before you yell at your spouse or your kids, yell at God. Not saying you should yell at God, but he can handle the complexity of your emotion, and he can also handle when you come back to him and ask for forgiveness in that. There is always a way. I think David does a good job of this. Yell at God is definitely different than what I mean by the way we might yell at our spouse. But just fully, David lays it out for God all the time. He says, I am mad. I don't understand why you're doing this. This is not okay. I'm really upset. And then in the same psalm, he'll circle back around and say, oh God, forgive me a sinner. He'll be like, I said those things and I meant those things, but I also mean what I say now. That you are, and then he'll pay respect to God. He'll say, you are a holy God, and I don't understand, and I am mad, but I trust you. And so I'm not telling you to use all the words of the English language when you speak to God and raise your voice necessarily. Just being transparent with God in prayer.
I understand what you're saying. Because,
Okay.
Like, God, like, the Holy Spirit knows, like, what we're asking for if we, like,
Yeah.
can't even say it. And, like, God sees our heart and knows that. Our husband
Mhm.
may know us pretty well and pretty fully, we feel like, and, like, finish our sentences and knows, like, our facial expressions
Yeah.
and what they truly mean. But even more so, God, knows.
Absolutely.
And so I understand what you're saying is, like, us laying it out before God, he can handle that and understand where we're coming from, and we don't have to explain that.
Right. He can't
He was-
misinterpret me.
Yeah, he doesn't understand. So us being able to burden God with our load.
Oh, yeah.
He doesn't say, go give your yoke to your husband and
Yeah.
your kids and your coworkers. He's
Yeah.
give it to me. So I understand what you're saying.
Absolutely. I've started making it a practice after work or before work to just be really angry about something in prayer. Sometimes, recently, it's been patient choices that have brought them into the hospital that make me so mad. And then seeing the way sin has introduced complex mental health issues into the world. And I don't mean like someone did this, therefore they have schizophrenia. I mean the origination of sin has wounded creation in a way it was never meant to be. And I've really struggled recently with some schizophrenic people that I've interacted with in a clinical setting because it just breaks my heart. Because that's not how they were supposed to be. That's not the life that God intended for them. And I'm not blaming God, and I'm not even angry with God. I'm just angry, and I'm just sad. And I have tried to really get that out there in prayer before I take that anger home. Because God does not need to abide by HIPAA confidentiality. So I can use first names. It's really nice. And so I can use first names in prayer, and medical conditions and birth dates and all the things. And it really helps me on many levels to go through that in prayer before I hit my family. And Jeffrey asked me, he says, I have water. He says, just like when I was in therapy, he never says, tell me about work. He'll say, how was work? Like he used to say, how was your counseling session? And I could say good or I could say hard. I try to never say counseling was bad because it's never bad. It was just difficult that day. And same with work, I would say it was really good or it was really difficult. And at my liberty and leisure, I can go into details, but I normally don't give them details. Because we abide by HIPAA as human beings. But anyways, that's kind of a tangent. But yeah, just I think all the way back to Naomi. The Lord has dealt very bitterly with me. I really appreciate that she's not like, it's just been hard, but it's fine. Because I've seen a lot of women say that, and it's not fine. Or they'll say something like, well, God has a plan, and dismiss all their grief with that. And it's like, you can feel that there's a trajectory in your life that God is taking you, or helping you move along, move about with, without completely dismissing your grief. I don't know how complex this emotion was for her. I don't know how angry she was necessarily with God. She does say in the following verses, I went away full and the Lord has brought me back empty.
It was
Why?
complex enough that she changed her name.
Yeah.
basically. I mean,
Yeah. Absolutely. I don't know. I don't think it was 100% anger,
No.
you know. And so she said, "Why call me Naomi, pleasant, when the Lord has testified against me and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me?"
Which even that's interesting wording, that the Lord has testified against
Yeah.
us.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder if she regretted leaving or.
There was actually, I didn't necessarily want to go that way with the class, because it was a take I hadn't really heard
Oh,
much
yeah.
before.
Yeah, it doesn't
No,
say that.
yeah, no. But what I'm talking about is there was I read a whole like commentary on basically saying like Elimelech did this to his family by leaving Bethlehem. He didn't have enough faith to stay in the homeland. That this calamity was brought upon his family because he left in the first place. It was a chain of events that was set off. And I skipped over the word famine. You know, like I wasn't going to think of that. And so,
But even with that, he was in the line, she was in the line, the lineage of Christ.
mhm.
So
Yeah.
using despair, using sin, using problems, and still blessing.
Yeah. And so she's not necessarily the best example, but I am very affirmed when I see people of faith or people who were helped by people of faith have, like we say with Patsy, big feelings, really big feelings. It's all like feelings. I'm going to try and quote my therapist again. You guys are getting I paid for a whole year of therapy. And as you get to know me, you're going to get for free. I'm like steel trap with that stuff she told me. Except for I can't remember what it was right now. She said, she said emotions are morally neutral. Anger is not a bad emotion. Happy is not a bad emotion. Grief is not a bad emotion. God made all the emotions. They're morally neutral. And so, because I struggled with, I could not bear for someone I love to be sad. I would not allow it. I would do anything I could to stifle that. And she said, they must experience that. You have to experience sadness. Jesus experienced sadness. You know, it's a full spectrum of human emotion. It affects you physiologically to suppress sadness and anger. The key is finding outlets that do not wound other people or yourself, frankly. And so I like seeing people in the Bible being transparent about how they feel. Now, I do not know what degree. I don't want to fill in too many lines and blanks with Naomi. This is my perspective reading what she's saying. She could be spitting mad and being super disrespectful to God outside of this. I don't know. But based on what I've seen, she's pretty devastated. And she feels victimized, not in like a trendy sense of being victimized. Is that okay to say? Like you know what I mean? Like she feels like what Aspen pointed out, the Lord has testified against me. I have had a period in my life where I asked someone once, is God doing this to punish me? I have felt that way before, once in my life. A number of terrible, awful things happened within like a 3-week span. And I genuinely wondered if God was punishing me. And that was go ahead.
How I get through that is I always remember God is in control even when I'm suffering.
Mm-hmm.
God is in control.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So the final verse, and then I have a couple questions, is, so Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, with her, who returned from the country of Moab. And they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. And that's where that cuts off, right before the next header, which is Ruth meets Boaz. It's going to be spicy in for next week. That threshing floor, though. So there's a couple different study questions I thought were interesting. But the first one that I asked myself was, do you fault Orpah for leaving?
Fault who for leaving?
Orpah. She left. Was that wrong? No. Right?
It may not have been. It wasn't the best choice.
Why wasn't it the best choice?
Because she wasn't going to encounter the Jehovah, one true God. and
Right.
The joy that can come from that. And
Right.
salvation, potentially.
Mm-hmm. But it wasn't necessarily a bad choice. But, so why are we so impressed with Ruth? It wasn't a sinful choice to go back home. Right.
It's a comfortable choice.
Yes. Yes. And so we are impressed with Ruth because it was the faith-filled, fearful choice. Right? But like you're saying, Orpah did not take a risk. Granted, girl's been through some stuff. I'm not saying like she went from conf to conf. Like, it was rough. But like, so she was going home to like be filled.
Say that phrase again.
She girl went through some stuff. She did not go from comf to comf, like comfy to comfy. Okay. She was going from like, she wanted to go home and cry, you know? I do that like 3 days a week. You know what I mean? Like, go home somewhere, and it's healthy. But going somewhere, like she was released by Naomi and said, go home and be with your people. Go home and be with your people. But we're really impressed with Ruth because her decision was completely unknown, but it was filled with faith. Mm-hmm.
I think it's interesting to see that the girls were not given a choice. She told them, go home.
Yeah. Yeah. I think she probably knew, if those girls are anything like me, if you're given the option of like, oh, it's okay, you can go. Like, of course I'm not going to go. When you put it like that, who's going to go? No. But being commanded to go home, and that was like a death sentence for Naomi to send those girls home. A long-term death sentence. You know, like.
She would likely have not made her way back to Bethlehem. She likely would have died on the way.
Yeah.
Alone.
In the time of famine and Judges, where people be wild. You know. Really, like, Wild West. Like, that's what it was like. Judges was crazy. Yeah. And so,
Let God have a plan.
yes. And so, my final question would be, when have you been an Orpah and when have you been a Ruth? What are times that you have made a permissible, comfortable decision? And what are times that you left the comfortable in a step of faith and reaped spiritual benefit? And reaping spiritual benefit can also be being of spiritual benefit to someone else. That's kind of what's been on my mind. I don't know what time this class ends. I'm just going.
2 minutes ago.
2 minutes ago. Okay. So take that thought with you this week. And let it challenge you in small moments and in big moments. And next week, we will meet Boaz. Yes.
At the beginning of the barley harvest.
Yes. Which is happening. That's going to be good.